Welcome to China Tech Talk, the weekly discussion of technology and startups here in China. I am John Artman, editor-in-chief of TechNode, and as always, I'm joined by Matthew Brennan, founder of China Channel. So this week we're talking with Edith Yeung, managing partner at 500 Startups. And it's actually really cool to get, I think, our first VC onto the show. I've known Edith for about a year now. She's been pretty active with startups and investing, as you might expect, in China and in Southeast Asia, and kind of looking at projects around the world. And so it was really cool to get her on the show and talk a little bit about what she's paying attention to, as well as giving some advice to startups both in China and outside of China.
Yeah, it has. Actually, I don't think that's deliberate, right? I mean, we can get more VCs on, and probably this year we will. Usually, they're pretty well informed people and have some interesting things to say, interesting perspectives, given what they have to do on a daily basis. And that's what we talked to Edith about. What she's doing on a daily basis, and she seems to be quite focused on the blockchain area, which is really hot right now, and I think she's also pretty excited and got some really good insight into the differences between the States and Chinese startup ecosystems, and the sort of strengths and weaknesses of both. So again, lots of insights in this one, I think.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm a bit jealous of venture capital people in general, because a lot of their time is just, as I suggest, but a lot of their time is doing research and learning, because you really have to understand the technology and the trends to actually make good investment decisions. And so you're investing in companies that actually have a chance, number one, of surviving, number two, being the next big thing. But with that, we give you Edith Yeung. Well, Edith, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Hey, thank you for having me, John.
So yeah, can you give us a brief introduction to yourself? A bit of background on how you got to where you are today, and also what you're doing right now.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you for having me, John. My name is Edith Yeung. I'm a partner at 500 Startups. 500 Startup is the world's most active early stage investor in the world. We started out in Silicon Valley, and now we are literally in over 20 different countries, actively supporting the local community. For me, I actually started as a developer many years ago. And I worked in a company called Siebel. It's a CRM company. Oracle bought Siebel, so I went to Oracle. After Oracle, I went to Autodesk. Autodesk make AutoCAD. So after 10 years enterprise software, I thought, this life is short. Enterprise is super boring. And I decided to start my own company. My first company was actually a media company in San Francisco. And I was really just like turn a meetup group, a hobby, into a conference. From 10 to 100 to 300 to 800 was the largest conference I put together, plus a team of writers. Then I realized, building something like TechNode and TechCrunch is just so hard. So I, through my conference, I met an amazing entrepreneur from China. His name is Yang, and he started Dolphin browser. And at the time, I was actually in San Francisco, and Dolphin actually was a all Chinese team, but all the users were outside of China. And Yongzhi basically recruited me to run all the non-China business. And that's how I actually got into the whole Chinese startup scene, because before that, I was in the Bay Area the whole time. Long story short, we grew Dolphin browser from a 0 to 150 million install. And 3 years ago, we sold it to a gaming company called Changyou, based out of Beijing, which we continue to be great friends, and Dolphin's still running independently. That's when I joined 500 Startups. So, and my focus now at 500 is actually quite similar to what I used to do at Dolphin, except now I'm not operating. Instead, I'm investing. But I'm totally psyched the fact that there's so many amazing Chinese teams, even compared to 5, 6 years ago, that from day one they're thinking about going global and want to conquer the world. So just really happy to be here at this point in time.
And so I'm really curious because this is something that I think happens more and more often these days, is that transition from entrepreneur into VC, into investor. And so, when you were talking with 500 startups, what was that conversation like? I mean, and what was it that really kind of pulled you from being an entrepreneur into an investor?
I think that, particularly for early stage, which, by the way, I think knowing what I know now, I definitely, well, first off, I was doing some angel investing before, and I really wanted to, I think investing, which I thought at the time shouldn't be that much of a difference between angel investing versus running a fund. The truth is actually very, very different because we are responsible for a lot of other investors who supported us. But the reason why I was attracted to 500 was because most of the Silicon Valley VC firms really don't care about international companies. Most of the VC friends I have in the Valley are happy to invest, any companies that they can drive to. Like if you're telling them a China story or Southeast Asia story, they care less. 500 really is the only one that truly want to build ecosystems around the world and really wanted to help and support and believe that China will be the future, Southeast Asia will be future, maybe even Africa. Silicon Valley is a mindset. It's not just a place. And unfortunately, a lot of my VC friends locally in the Valley don't really care that much. So I felt like, I finally found a group of people that sort of like-minded and support this thesis that, you could be somewhere else and still be able to build a global business, regardless of where you're from.
Is that mindset not changing a little bit now, Edith? Like, surely they must recognize China is having, has lots of great ideas and opportunities also.
I think that, yeah, and recently there's a lot of heated discussion comparing, China versus U.S. And I made a comment the other day in a conference that, sometimes I guess if I say, hey, China versus US, get people excited because it sounds like you're creating news, there's like enemy. And I have to say, the truth is, most of the Silicon Valley entrepreneurs or investors, they started to have a little bit more awareness. And I think actually really started with Alibaba when IPO. And I can guarantee you 99% of the people in Silicon Valley don't even know what Taobao is. They know what Alibaba is, but they have no idea why Tencent or Ali, and never actually even bother to spend time to play with the product. And versus most of my Chinese investor friends or entrepreneurs, they know what is going on in Silicon Valley better than most of the people in Silicon Valley. So as much as I think now there's awareness of, wow, China market is so amazing and strong, I think many of the folks in the US still don't really bother that much to really learn, which is something that I think a couple of weeks ago, Michael Moritz wrote, I think is an awesome article on Financial Times about Silicon Valley people now need to wake up. And I actually really agree with his viewpoint. But even that, I've been seeing a lot of heated discussion, even among some of the people that I really respect that didn't agree with what he said. So I think it's still going to take some time to get to the point where we're truly respect and learning from each other rather than just picking fights.
That article was the one about 996 as well, the working culture?
Yeah.
Is that the same one I'm thinking of? Yeah. So I mean, I think the stuff in that is fairly obvious to anyone who spent time on the ground in China, in the startup scene, that the pace is just much faster. And I totally agree with what you said. There's a huge like asymmetry of knowledge between the two places. But yeah, but part of me says, this has to change, and it can't keep going on like this.
Completely agree. And I think I think more and more Americans are actually getting a little bit more defensive, rather than they still like to, particularly U.S. media, like to paint a picture. It's, hey, the Chinese are still copycats, and that is so not the case anymore. And the only reason they still saying that because they don't actually even understand or bother to learn what's going on in China market, or even really trying to learn what's going on product or market wise. And I think China market is just so exciting, and I've been meeting so many hardworking and such smart Chinese entrepreneurs. I think China tech is has a really bright future. So,
yeah. That's one of the reasons that we're doing the podcast. Because I think that information asymmetry is really kind of interesting, because it reminds me of that show Dog Whisperer on American television that I used to watch sometimes in university. And the trainer would always, I forget his name now, would always talk about how alpha dogs, so leaders of the pack, they always ignore the other dogs. And I think that's a similar analogy can be applied to what the United States in general and China. This idea that we have so much going on here, and what's going on here is so important, and we're so much better that we don't need to pay attention to China or perhaps even other parts of the world.
Yep, completely agree.
Mm-hmm. Well, to be fair, I mean, like on the other side, to argue the other way, I would say, how much do we know about the India market? There's just huge markets in other parts of the world that we're completely ignorant of, or South America as another example. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty tough to be, to keep on top. A lot of people, obviously, your home market is where you're going to have your focus. It's going to be the one you understand best. And so it does take a lot of energy to like really understand products from another culture. So there is I understand it to some degree, but even so, I think there is a big difference, and that difference needs to won't be there in a couple of years, I guess.
Hope not. And one of the things that I would like to support and promote more is not necessarily like a generic China versus US, but instead focus on different vertical or industries, because technology is a universal language, and regardless it's AI or autonomous cars or blockchain or in gaming, if you are a great game developers, you get respect, doesn't matter where you go. Same case for AI, same case for blockchain. I think it's a matter of like promoting and focus more on the talent around the world, rather than, hey, this is where they're from or they're from. We shouldn't. Technology doesn't discriminate. We do, and we should focus on the tech and build something cool. And this is what startup is all about, right?
So I guess, I mean, looking at China, I mean, so what's your or 500 startups focus when it comes to China, the China market right now?
Yeah, and one thing I'm really excited about is definitely blockchain. And there have been some really interesting movements. Started with about 9 months ago, I met a guy, his name Hitters. And one of my old colleagues from Dolphin is his co-founder and CTO. And when I first met him, I mean, I bought like a few Bitcoin like 5 years ago, but that really didn't like make me an expert at all. When I met Hitters and Robin, he kept explaining to me that, hey, I started this other project called, now it's called Neo, used to be called Anshare. It's basically Ethereum of China. That's the positioning. And when I met him, I didn't really understand what he was talking about until I came back to the Valley. I come back pretty often just to sort of hang out and check in with some of my friends. And And usually some of the local VCs would ask me what's happening in China. And I told one of them, I said, oh, I met this Chinese entrepreneur. He's, want to build a blockchain search platform, decentralized search platform. And he started this other project called AntShares. And my American investor friends got so excited that you have to work with this team. And then I realized it's because he invested in their token and increased it, I don't know, like 20 or 40x in 2 months. And then I realized, wow, I asked him, how did you actually even find out about this? And he goes, oh, I found it on Reddit and Google translated it. And that's how I bought the token. And I just, it's so astonished to me, the fact that, wow, now there are some, like not a lot, but there are a handful of investors, non-Chinese, have a lot of appreciation for certain technology that come out from China, regardless it's blockchain or AI. And frankly, I actually think that there's no difference really in terms of their level of proficiency, and in some way they're even greater, I think, than a lot of the Americans I have met. And I'm actually been spending the last 6 months really wanted to learn as much as I can to help Chinese blockchain projects to build international brand from day one. And this is something that I will continue to focus on at least the early part of 2018. I think it's just something super exciting. And surprisingly, most of the Chinese teams are also very open. They know that this is not something like if you're working on gaming, or if you're working on e-commerce, most of these teams, the Chinese team wouldn't even bother to think about overseas market. But for blockchain related projects, they from day one they think super global and international. Like they wanted to build, just to start, like their website, even the Chinese and English at the same time. So I just love the energy and the fact that they're so global minded, and that will be definitely my focus for 2018.
Okay, that sounds really cool, actually. So, what's your typical day look like then, Edith? If that's your focus.
My typical day? Did you? Oh,
yeah.
My typical day. Recently, I started working on a token blockchain track, actually in the Valley. We're running that in March. So I've been literally reading a lot of white paper, talking to a lot of many blockchain teams, regardless is China, US, and in fact, a little bit the other way around. A lot of the non-Chinese projects are also super interested in China market. So spend a lot of time reading and a lot of time interviewing teams, and just super fun. I feel like I'm back in college again, because there's super technical things that I need to learn, and pulling in a lot more cryptography and blockchain experts to come help us in reviewing all these deals. So been really fun and challenging.
Right. I still haven't really got my head around blockchain fully. I think, John, you're a lot more bullish on it than I am. How long did it take you to get your head around blockchain, you think, Edith? I mean, have you think you fully got a grasp of this technology?
I think that I'm barely crypto fluent, but I'm definitely not crypto native. And I found myself sitting in so the type of project that I'm looking for are not too application level. I think blockchain, there's so many infrastructure challenges, particular security, scalability, privacy, identity. There's a lot of things that more core on-chain, off-chain type projects that need, like the whole ecosystem need to be fixed to continue to grow. So, and those level of projects are super technical. And I have to say, I'm bringing in a lot of developers to help me to evaluate some of these. And sometimes I'm like, wow, I don't know what they're talking about either. But hey, as I'm growing my vocabulary, I'm feeling better day by day. But there's a lot of new things to learn, and it's amazing.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that I'm bullish. I mean, it depends on. I mean, I guess it's a spectrum, right? I mean, I think that what we're seeing right now is it's all speculation. Most of it's speculation, and there are a few good companies, a few good projects out there, but a lot of the attention is going to the ICOs and the price of an individual token or an individual coin.
Right.
I think that blockchain as a technology, it's super promising. And Edith, I really like those terms that you just used, crypto fluent and crypto native. Like it's kind of funny thinking about it in terms of a new language, because it really is. And I would say that I'm somewhere below fluency. That's for sure. I talk with blockchain companies every once in a while, and most of the time I come in, I'm like, okay, I kind of know what they're doing, or I kind of understand what's happening in the space right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I talk with them, and they just drop all these knowledge bombs on me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much going on. And there's so much that I think that so many, like including myself, so many people do not really understand. And that's kind of my question as well. I mean, like, when we're looking at a lot of these projects, I mean, how much do the people developing them really understand kind of the technology or what they're doing?
Yeah. Well, so I actually find myself, and back to your original question earlier on, like, how do I spend my day, other than reading and understanding the technology, or the whole thesis of why. By the way, there's a lot of bullshit projects that don't really have nothing to do with blockchain, are trying to do token sale, and just anyway, there's a lot of scam alert going on these days. But I think that the key thing is to evaluate the team. So I found myself spending a lot of time looking at GitHub, really like checking out backgrounds for specific people, regardless it's on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Telegram, on Reddit. There are a lot of discussion talking about various people and what they have done. And yeah, many of them have no idea what they're talking about. And to be crypto native, really, you need to be technical. And I found there are a lot of projects actually have nothing to do with blockchain, and they're trying to, because there's a bubble right now in terms of ICO. But I think the part that I think is exciting is the more infrastructure protocol level projects, because the whole essence of why ICO even exists to begin with is because they want to have these tokens to incentivize developers to continue to contribute code base and provide resources to make a protocol better. So that's how developers, if they can't, I used to be a mobile developer. If you put an app on iOS and Android, you don't make money from day one. In fact, you need to spend a lot of marketing dollar to be able to monetize. But with this concept is exciting, because really I think is basically open source meet capitalism from day one. And the developers are excited because they monetize via token with their work. So that's sort of the original intent for ICOs. And now all the other projects are trying to ICOs because it's such a big bubble. But I think the true projects, the only one will remain are the one that have pure developer and technology intent to make a better ecosystem. Anyway, I'm like working on a presentation particular for crypto investing, and I'm looking at all these projects. There's over 1,500 token being listed around the world right now, and many of them are bull. So I'm basically trying to put together a whole scam alert checklist for everybody, so we don't go into. I'm spending way too much time like analyzing these projects, so that's what I do all day long.
Could you let us know what are some of your red flags?
Many warning signs. But to start, regardless of all the various different platforms I mentioned earlier to check out people's background, regardless on their white paper, on their website, on various different places, to start, the number one thing is to figure out what's the purpose for this particular token. And by the way, there's a lot of concept. Let's say a gaming token. You guys know better than most people that Kuaishou or YY, these sort of virtual goods concept, been around for 10 plus years. You don't need blockchain for that, right? Mm. So even though there are some tokenized ideas that may seem relevant, many of them actually doesn't really matter. They don't need blockchain for that. So therefore, their token design a lot of times have nothing to do with like why you use blockchain. So that's the number one thing like I think everybody should look at. And then the actual token allocation, which means that if they are raising, let's say, $20 million and 100% of these proceeds is basically that go back to the team, right? They don't really, the token allocation don't think about the developer community or sort of future economic design. Then they're here just to, trying to raise money just for themselves. And then I hate seeing all these celebrities endorsing various different token projects. That's a huge scam alert. And then sometimes I even found there are certain hackers will spoof. If there's a token project going on, they will actually get a different domain extension and then pretend to be a project, but really is not, and start taking money. So anyway, there are many like, small little things that, as you're looking at more of these projects, then you will find out, wow, there's really a lot of scam out there. But I found, the true, the good projects, great projects are usually, run by folks that, been in the blockchain space for a long time, that already have contributed open source. When you run these code on GitHub, it actually works. So there's definitely like a lot of things to do that to help everybody to evaluate good projects.
Yeah, and I think that looking at does this problem actually need blockchain? I think is perhaps a really, it's a really important question. I was talking with with someone from A-Chain the other day. They're trying to make an infrastructure protocol basically, and it's funny because someone was telling me that they've been going to a lot of different conferences recently, presenting themselves, their ideas and things like that. And then he told me a story about how they had a booth at one of these conferences, and someone comes up to him and says, I really want your help with what I'm trying to do. Mm-hmm. I really hope that blockchain can help me. And they say, well, what are you trying to do? And he's like, well, I'm trying to sell breast milk from America. It's like what? Your problems are a lot bigger than blockchain.
Yeah, even the recent talk of Facebook using blockchain or crypto or like trying to explore. I to me that just I just don't see how it could add value. Where's that going to add value to Facebook in the same way as like we're just talking about YY or Kuaishou?
Yeah, like there's no need for YY or Kuaishou to ever do like an ICO because blockchain will only slow them down, and because the infrastructure is not quite there yet to support like high volume and transaction. And anyway, I think that right now is definitely a bubble, and I'm still excited regardless about the promises that the blockchain technology can bring to the world. And it's not a bad thing, as different. I believe like 2018, there will be more compliance, more regulations. I think the future of crypto is beyond just Bitcoin. It's really about the technology promises. I think is very exciting, but there's just still a lot of infrastructure level projects need to be in place to improve, to get to the point where this can really up and running. The way that I look at look at it, which is also like a hot topic in China too, and in US, is like all the AI, all the artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning. These are all really cool tech that is not at is not like B2C level type use cases yet. Most of them are still B2B. And I think that is the same case for blockchain, which I think some of these projects this year, hopefully, you will see not just because they raise a lot of money, is really they form some meaningful partnership and have good use cases that built on their protocol. Now, then we're talking, right? Otherwise, I'm worried that it will be more hype. But this is not this vertical should be about. This industry should be about building some meaningful tech and push it forward.
I guess when you're talking about kind of these areas that you're focusing on, are you looking mostly at startups from China, or are you looking at kind of a broader area?
I look at teams outside China as well, but I particularly have affinity wanting to help Chinese teams to go international. And 500 and myself there's a lot of amazing investor in China. I think that our competitive advantage is definitely we have a lot of hands-on like operator mindset when we invest. So I don't work with a lot of teams in China, but the handful of teams that we have the pleasure to invest and get involved with are just super savvy Chinese entrepreneurs that, regardless, is Agora, which is basically video streaming as a service out of Shanghai, Castbox of Beijing. They're actually a Himalaya for US market, but all Chinese team, and plus Nebulous, another blockchain team out of Beijing. They're all just really amazing people that so hardworking, and it's not 996, it's actually 997. They work all the time, and I work. So Chinese New Year is coming, right? I'm staying in this. I don't.
Right.
Like, I love working, so I don't want to like stay in China when nobody's working. So I'm in the States this couple of weeks, and whenever, doesn't matter what time of the day, I message any of my CEOs and teams on WeChat, they will answer me like right away. They don't sleep. They just work all the time. I mean, it's so impressed. Anyway, super inspired by all these guys, and I hope to see more and look forward, working with more and more Chinese CEOs that want to go global.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's an increasing number there. So, do you have Edith? Do you have freedom to invest in what you want? How does that process work when you identify a company that you're interested in China?
Yeah, we actually have quite a bit of freedom. But first off, 500, because we do early stage investments, and one of the reasons why I'm forcing myself to be more crypto fluent and hopefully native one day is because if we do early stage investment, we have to be sort of in the cutting edge in terms of new trends, new technology trends. If I'm investing in another music app or another e-commerce app in China or US, it's too late. I really should be doing growth stage investment with the 100 million, 200 million check size, right? But for us, because we're early, so we found ourselves each of the partners within 500 will usually pick one or two sort of main theme to focus on and become the expert of it. Then that's how you be able to source and be able to kind of compete for the right deals, right? Otherwise, if I don't know what I'm talking about, there's no way I will be able to help any of these blockchain CEOs to get to what they want. And so, but if I'm looking at, let's say, healthcare, that's not my domain expertise. And so usually I will pull in our healthcare experts within the firm to help us to look at different deals. So yeah, that's how we usually work. I mean, quite a bit of freedom, but definitely need to continue to keep learning. So
cool. So I guess that's kind of, so when you're looking at so what other regional areas are you active in? I mean, Hong Kong, Southeast Asia.
Yeah, we are, other than Silicon Valley, we are very active in Southeast Asia. We have team in Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, um, Malaysia, just many of these countries. And then Japan and Korea, we also have teams there. And then I would say around the world, Israel, London, Berlin, Brazil, Mexico. We have a team in all these places. So we try, all the partners try to compare notes as much as possible. And sometimes when we come into sort of blockchain or AI type, these big topic, this is really a world phenomenon. Although I still feel that the most technical teams, I still find it mostly from the Valley, China, and Israel are the three places where I think Southeast Asia tends to follow what China is doing, and Korea and Japan's team usually sort of stay in their own economy. Um, so different ecosystems have their own characteristics, which I found it fascinating because every time I get the chance to speak with other partners around the world, they all have their unique perspective, and it's just fascinating to learn what's going on in all these different pockets in the world.
So I guess, I mean, like, when we're looking at, China and kind of the Asia, East Asia, Southeast Asia region, I mean, like, one of the big stories of 2017 and then coming into 2018 is going in Chinese companies going into Southeast Asia. So I'm curious, what's been your experience of that, and then what do you think are some challenges going between China and Southeast Asia, either inbound to China or outbound to Southeast Asia?
I have to share a story with you guys. I never forgot. So I went to Vietnam a few years ago on behalf of Dolphin, and at the time wanted to strike some local partnership. And I have a few local friends who were really helpful and introduced me to a really large local conglomerate. And I never felt, I never realized that sometimes doing tech business could be so political. And that person literally asked me, "Are you from China?" And I said, "I'm obviously Chinese, but we have teams in China and in the US." And he goes, "If you're Chinese, I can't really work with you guys." And and I was so shocked. I said, "Why?" He said, "Because Chinese government just trying to invade some island at the time, and all the young people was at the time boycotting WeChat, and they literally like lost like 1 million in install base overnight." Because I can't work with Chinese teams. I was so shocked. So, so this is sort of unique, I guess, for Vietnam case. But I think that for the rest of Southeast Asia, regardless, is Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia. Obviously, a lot of teams usually set out in Singapore. I found there's certain behavior are quite similar compared to Southeast Asia and China. Regardless, is gaming or like shopping. There's just a lot of similarity. I think very like because sort of the Chinese, sort of the China root. There's a lot of local Chinese in this different Southeast Asia countries are driving a lot of these trends. So and many of them actually speak Mandarin as well. So I've been meeting teams also in Southeast Asia that have quite strong tie and connection with sort of their counterpart in China, particularly related to gaming and video streaming, sort of similar to YY. There's many versions of that in Southeast Asia. And many of their early investors are actually some of these players in China. As you guys noticed, that Alibaba and Tencent both very quite active now, investing and also acquiring companies in Southeast Asia. I think this will continue and will only go stronger because there's a lot of marketing and product similarity and user similarity, much more so, honestly, than China and US. Um, so yeah, I'm really excited about that particular connection. I think there's definitely more and more of these investment and M&A activities to come.
But do you see it mostly being like outbound into Southeast Asia, like China to Southeast Asia, or do you see it the reverse occurring as well?
I see more not necessarily outbound, but there's some outbound. I think there's quite a few gaming companies are quite active in Southeast
Mm.
Asia. But for a Southeast Asian entrepreneur to come into China is very difficult, mostly because of language and the way how marketing work. So if I'm working on a mobile app, literally like most is an Android play, right? And there are so many third-party app store in China. There's no Google Play, and to get feature or submit your app, and everything is pretty much all in Chinese. It's very difficult for Southeast Asian entrepreneurs to go into China. Vice versa, I think is a lot more simpler. I think other than China, everywhere in the world is, if you're working on mobile, is pretty much iOS and Android, and that's all you have to deal with, and it's a lot easier. So what I found is probably more Chinese investors getting more and more active in Southeast Asia, and do a lot of sharing and bring down actually on how you monetize, how you do marketing, things that they learn in China market, and sort of and share with their local Southeast Asian founders to learn from the Chinese way, but sort of adapt it for local market. I see a lot more of that rather than Southeast Asian going to China. It's a little, it's more the outbound rather than inbound.
Yeah, I would go along with that. I think that
Yeah,
that all makes total sense.
yeah. China market is not easy. There's a lot of work.
No.
It's really not. It's really not. Yeah, it's very overwhelming, I think, for people coming in fresh. Very overwhelming.
Yeah, and I think the best analogy, I love John was making an analogy earlier, is China market is basically, if you never driven a car before, working in China is driving a stick shift on a slippery slope. And once you master that, everywhere you go, it's just so easy.
Right.
Well, that's
Like driving an automatic on a flat one.
Right. There's another metaphor about something about in the Chinese startups are used to being in the desert or something like that. I forget. So it's like basically China's a desert, but then you go everywhere else and it's kind of like a little bit better. So for them, it's like amazing. Or like those runners in Africa who live at like high altitude, right? So they've where the air is really, really thin and there's low oxygen. So that's like China. And then when they come down to like do a marathon in like San Francisco, it's like, oh my God, it's so there's oxygen everywhere. It's so easy.
Yep. Yeah. Anyway, I think it's just there's a lot of things that we all need to learn from Chinese entrepreneurs and Chinese investors. But hopefully, I don't want to discourage like everyone to say don't go. It's just that because it is language wise and the way basically the product, marketing, and just people, the way all three of these areas are different. And if there's a will, there's always a way. But I found that usually for companies a little bit later stage, if they want to go into China, not for early stage in companies. Because you do need a lot of people, and very likely you have to redo your product to fit in the market. And funding is actually the least of the problem. There's plenty of money. But the US or to China story, there's not a whole lot of very successful use cases to learn from. So it scares a lot of people. I do think it could work,
right.
But it's
right. I mean, like an Apple, basically, and they're still having problems.
Right. And they're definitely not short of money. So it's definitely not for the faint of heart. But I'm very excited about the market. You really need to think about My suggestion is probably not B2C, super consumer focused product, especially for software. It's much harder. I think sort of the super technical things like autonomous car, AI, blockchain. These are universal languages that doesn't matter, right? What country you're in. That I found more likely, and usually the locals are super like they welcome because these are so deep tech. They need the talent, they need the support. So I'm quite optimistic in those area for outside going to China market. But if it's consumer focused, too early stage,
right, and that plays in with what
it.
you were saying, especially about blockchain. Looking at infrastructure projects versus wide user bases and like 2C kind of blockchain products. And I think that's actually super interesting.
Yep.
Because when we were talking about blockchain earlier. It does feel like, I mean, as you were saying, with blockchain, AI, autonomous driving, and things like that, that there is this sense of I wouldn't say equity, but parity between China and the rest of the world, where finally, I mean, quote unquote, finally, China is kind of on even ground. Obviously, the competitive advantages are a little bit different. The competencies are a little bit different. But number one, that's a good thing. Number two, China's what China does have is good enough, is desirable enough that people want to engage in that conversation, and that Chinese entrepreneurs themselves are ready to do so as well, which I think is really.
Yep.
I mean, it's amazing to see that China is kind of on a similar footing now.
Yep. It's very exciting to see, and on top of that, I think now some of these projects are run by millennial, and they're young, and they grew up, knowing that there's Google and Facebook, Twitter, even though they may not be able to access it, they're aware of it. And I found the 20 something or early 30s in China are very open minded. They want to learn. They know, and also they're really self aware that they're not good at it, and they want coaching and they want help. And that's harder to do. Like if you're already super successful in China, for the last generation, it's tough for older people to adapt. So anyway, that's how I maintain my youthfulness, is to hang out as many young people as possible.
Yeah, a lot of the founders in China are super young, and the teams are really, really young. It's quite impressive.
Yeah, and they're so smart, and I'm just so impressed. And I'm completely okay to just make. I hopefully like this year I have at least another dozen of millennial friends, so that I can absorb as much as of new lingo as possible.
I think we've got two areas which are a little. I haven't really got a segue into them. They're kind of different topics, but we haven't, I guess, talk more broadly about the wider VC industry. So in China, Edith, what will you say are like you're obviously focusing on blockchain as we've just been talking about, but what would you say are the super hot areas right now? What are most people focusing on in the VC community in China?
I think the VC community been either doing, at least some of my friends, much later stage investment like Total or gaming, things that is not necessarily new, but they are going to later and later stage. I was just looking at this news today that Tencent is investing in like over 400 million into Shanda, and this is like for pre-IPO deals. So some of my friends are doing like huge deals, like $100 million plus, but those are for I don't know how to say it in English, but 消费升值, sort of to increase sort of the consumer.
The consumption upgrade.
That's right.
I think
that's right.
Yeah.
Consumption upgrade. So that will continue to go strong. I think for early stage, definitely the blockchain, AI, autonomous cars. These are things that it's not just for China. I think worldwide, a lot of the VCs are paying attention to. And then I think China also media is quite strong. That just in general, like looking at media related projects, I think like movies, gaming. I think VR have died down quite a bit compared to a couple years ago. But just content like is now I feel like the Chinese consumers are not like 5 years ago. They're willing to pay. And so apps like Himalaya or 逻知思维, like these are like all these learning content, people are willing to pay and they make a lot of money. So I think that will continue to go strong. And then also I see more and more vertical focused fund, let's say education, it's still going really, really strong. In addition to Tao or New Oriental, they are very active investing in things that in like within their ecosystem, sort of to help their traditional business to increase ARPU for the existing users. I see more of that. But yeah, there are more and more vertical like, driven fund that I think, regardless is from the corporate VC or even for the tier one VCs, they wanted to go into more specialized. Like healthcare, for example, there's a handful of funds that are really specific on healthcare, and they appreciate the fact that these experts understand how the business works for a specific vertical. So I'm excited about that. Like these are healthcare and education are huge challenges and problems in China, and definitely needs special attention. I think that it's really good to see more and more of these.
Yeah, I think there was a good article on TechNode just today or yesterday about the sort of healthcare area for Tencent. And one of the interesting points was, combined with AI, they believe there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in that area.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, you look at the problems of healthcare in China, and even just a little bit of technology. You introduce a little bit of technology, and you're going to see great improvements across the board, and it's really kind of cool to see Tencent getting into that. But then also, the Chinese government, they've been pretty. They've been welcoming to private-public partnerships, as they put it, and it looks like TechNode is, excuse me, not TechNode. It looks like Tencent is one of their bigger partners in that area.
Yeah, and another part that I'm very excited, particularly related to AI for healthcare or AI for education, is that I think Chinese government plus a lot of the Chinese conglomerate are a lot more, surprisingly, easier to work with than the US counterpart. It gets so difficult to get any healthcare data in the US. Forget about it. But I think if Chinese government willing to like behind, let's say BGI Genomics, for example, it just gets so much government support over the years. And now last year or the year before they went public, it's just something that if the Chinese government wanted to support certain things, it will happen. And I think compared to the rest of the world, most of these governments are not that strong, and they don't have the foresight. Just looking at the US, now, and that's so not the case in China. Chinese government is so strong, and they are really good for big data, AI, blockchain, the technology future. It's just a really, really good thing to see, actually.
Well, for sure, AI. I mean, it seems like totally anything AI the government will support almost. Blockchain, though, I mean, we've seen some legislation in this area which sort of indicates that, certainly on cryptocurrencies, that the government's less welcoming, shall we say.
I want to separate the crypto versus blockchain. I think many of the governments, Chinese government's department or Alibaba, they welcome blockchain technology, not crypto. So I think the technology itself, bundled with this massive volume of data, it will be interesting to see how it all worked out. But I think, so just a slight difference there. But it's exciting to see. I think that, there's a joke going on. Well, at least I think it's funny, but it's not funny for some people. Chinese, the Chinese government is run by engineers. The American government is run by lawyers,
Yeah.
and it's just I think it's a really good thing to see. There's so much technology advancement that now come from China, and we'll see more and more. So I'm super excited about that.
Can we just squeeze in that last question? Because I'm just really interested about what you're going to say, Edith. Like, it's not actually related to what we've been talking about, but the last one I had was like just about mobile products, because you've got experience there with Dolphin browser, and so I think you might have some insights into like the sort of broad differences that you find most interesting comparing like Chinese and US product teams, especially in terms of mobile.
There's many differences, but I think in terms of mobile, in general, as I mentioned earlier, I think that first start with people. Chinese teams are amazingly hardworking and work really, really fast. I found that a lot of teams in the US, it's not that they don't want to work fast, but they usually are very critical on analytics and they plan a little bit more. Of course, you want to move fast and break things, but I found that Chinese work 10 times faster than the US team that I see. And then also related to the product itself, there is a big difference. I don't know if it's obvious to everyone. Is a lot of the just the Chinese market itself for mobile users, a large portion of them are not as sophisticated or educated compared to the US. So, which leads to when the product team design a Chinese mobile product, a lot of times you would start with looking at something that you felt like, oh my God, how can you cramp 1,000 things on the same screen? Versus that in the US, most of the apps is like one app do one thing. An app like WeChat, it doesn't exist. I don't think it will ever exist in outside of China, because it's like one mega app that do many, many things. And in the US, it's all about simplicity. I do this one thing on this one app, I do another thing on this other app. So that's why there's a whole thing of like deep linking earlier in the States, but it doesn't exist in China. It's everything in one place. You start to see you can pretty much do everything on WeChat. That's that. And then also monetization. I found Chinese mobile app a lot more aggressive in terms of monetization compared to the US. I think there's a lot of things that the Americans can learn from China. And just as simple as what we mentioned earlier, like Kuaishou, YY, Liu Jianfang, or Momo. Momo, I guess, more recent, but the other video streaming app, really the US is copying China in terms of virtual goods and how all these things work. It didn't come from the US. So anyway, these are just a few examples that I see in terms of sort of product, people, market, and as I mentioned earlier, also it's very complicated to promote a mobile app in China. There's so many third-party app stores, and many of them will want you as an app developer to implement their own payment system. So can you imagine, in addition to Android and iOS, you have to implement at least 5 to 10 other payment systems and talk with all these, app store owner to try editors and figure out to get features. It's a lot of work. And so the marketing team is usually a much bigger marketing team that you see for mobile team in China versus US. So that's sort of the few area I found in terms of differences, and that's why most of my teams in the US, I don't encourage them to come from China, to go to China at all. And the other way around, I think for a Chinese team to go overseas, they actually found it so much easier in the US, particularly with marketing. But yet sometimes they have a problem with product market fit just because the user behavior is different. So I think we just need to continue to learn from each other, regardless it's product, market, hiring, and with the right people. Just a lot of work when you go overseas, regardless of where you go, inbound or outbound.
Yeah, I was listening to an interview from I think it was someone from Baidu saying that the product teams in China are like a lot more philosophical about how they approach their product and the choices they make with regard to what's in there and how people are using it. Do you have any insight into any comment to add to that kind of thought about how they approach their product in China? Do you see there's a sort of difference in the way they think about it?
I think that don't get me wrong. I'm sure that the BAT of the world also hire really, really good people in the US. What I see quite a bit is when there's any Chinese companies hire local people in the US and say that they are global. I have to say a good product team or product manager, regardless you're Chinese or US, are very philosophical and very methodical about every single thing they do. Because a good product manager is really about continue to test and try out a lot of different things and talk to as many users and see how they. I think the number one most important thing for a product manager is actually not about increasing install, is about keeping engaged user to be more engaged, to spend as much time on your app as possible and be super thoughtful about every single product feature you create. And I found that a lot of the Chinese companies are not able to hire good product manager in the US because the good ones would rather work in Apple, Google, Facebook, Twitter, and it's quite difficult actually to work with engineering team or product team in a different country. So and end up that a lot of, honestly, even some of my own teams that I have invested in, when they come to the US, I just found them they're having a very hard time to hire top tier talent, particular on product managers. So when they hire somebody who's not as top tier, then they will find their feedback is not that great, or they just give a little bit superficial response when they ask about product. I think it's a people problem rather than like how you approach product. I think it's very difficult to find good product manager, not let alone that being a foreign company and trying to hire top-notch team. It's not easy.
Well, Edith, again, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I mean, it was a fascinating look at a lot of different things, and it's always good to catch up with you as well.
Yeah, great chatting with you, John. And I'm looking forward to meeting more awesome blockchain AI companies from China.
So yeah, Edith, actually, before we do go, if people do want to get in touch with you, where can they find you?
I am, since I assume all my audience in listening to an English podcast, you want to explore China. So probably WeChat will be the easiest. My WeChat ID is EDITHYEUNG. And I'm very open to chat about China tech market all day long. So I look forward to chatting with you guys.
Perfect. And we'll include that in the show notes. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, we'd really appreciate it if you left us a review on iTunes. And if you're on Pocket Cast or Overcast, you can just tap on that star button and it will recommend this episode to your network. Alternatively, if you want to give us some feedback directly, you can find links to our social profiles in the show notes.